If the thought of airports and flying stresses you out, this video is going to turn you into a total relaxed pro, with expert airplane tips ranging from booking and arriving at the airport, all the way to boarding without bursting into tears. If you're new here, hi, I'm Christina from happytowander.com, and this channel is all about practical travel tips, so be sure to like and subscribe for more videos just like this one. Now let's start with tip number 1, which I think is such an underrated tip, and that is to book your flight for an off-peak period. Honestly, the time that you book your flight for can make a huge difference in your experience. So if you have the luxury of flexibility, make sure you're booking your flight for a time that's not busy at the airport, generally first thing in the morning or really early in the morning or later at night. Of course, this will depend on the specific airport that you're flying out of. Some really busy business travel hubs, for instance, might actually be quite busy in the early morning, so just be sure to research that. But just keep in mind that when you book your flight can actually make a big difference, especially if you're worried about things like delays and punctuality. I found that early morning flights have a less likely chance of being delayed. Not saying it's zero, but it is a lot lower than if you were to wait until later in the day when different delays and issues can kind of accumulate over time. In addition to the timing of your flight, I find that flying midweek tends to be less busy as well. Now, another great new tip is to pre-book a time slot for when you go through security. Now, this is a relatively recent development, but I've noticed that a lot of airports these days will actually offer the possibility of pre-booking a time slot to go through security. This means that you don't need to wait in the super long security line once you arrive. I recently did this on a flight from Toronto back to Vancouver, and it was honestly so simple. It takes a few seconds to just pre-book a time slot online, and then you get to go in a separate lineup that takes just a few minutes. Of course, whether or not this is available depends on your specific airport, but just know that this is increasingly an option now, so be sure to look into it. On a similar note, if you are driving and parking at the airport, it's quite important for you to actually book a parking slot in advance, because most of the time this is going to save you money and also make it less stressful once you get there. The next tip is simple, but I feel like a lot of people still don't use it, and that is to check in online. Most airlines offer online check-in 24 hours in advance of your flight, and make sure you really hop onto that check-in as soon as it opens, because that gives you the most flexibility in terms of moving your seat around if you want to change your seat. Or anecdotally, I've also heard that those who check in first are the ones that are least likely to get bumped if the flight is for some reason overbooked. So extra incentive to be checking in advance. Definitely take advantage of checking in online, because then you don't need to be waiting in check-in lines, and even if you need to check a bag, most of the time there actually is a separate lineup for just baggage drop-off. So in any case, you're sure to save time, if not at least a little bit of stress. If you are using the online check-in process to choose a seat, one really great resource that I can recommend is Seat Guru. With them, you can actually just type in your flight number, and then it'll show you the plane that you'll be sitting on, as well as the different seating configurations, places with more legroom, etc. Generally speaking, I would sit closer to the front of the plane if you have a tight connection to make or if you want to be first off the plane. I would sit in the middle if you're looking to avoid turbulence. And I would avoid any seats close to the bathroom just because you want to be minimizing any potential disruptions during your flight. And trust me, if you're sitting close to the bathroom, there's always going to be a lineup of people next to your seat waiting to go in and out. So keep that in mind. Another thing to look into if you're a frequent traveler is enrolling in programs like Global Entry or TSA PreCheck. So this will basically allow you to go through security a lot quicker and a lot easier. I mean, it's definitely not needed for everyone, but if you do travel often and don't like the hassle of security, this can really expedite the process and also save you quite a bit of time and stress. And also, if you're planning on doing a big trip or planning on doing a lot of traveling throughout the year, it's not a bad idea to look into a travel-friendly credit card either. You're going to be spending so much money on hotels and flights that it just makes sense to be earning points as you go and reaping in all these different travel rewards that could potentially add up to like thousands of dollars worth of savings. Some premium cards also offer additional perks like lounge access and also travel insurance, so I know that I get those perks with my Amex Platinum, for instance, and for me, because I travel so often, it is worth it. But be sure to look into the different options that are available to you in your country. Now, honestly, lounges are a game changer when it comes to having a more stress-free airport experience, but they don't come cheap. So what I would really recommend is if you want to take advantage of lounges while you're traveling, look into a credit card that offers lounge passes or lounge access, just because paying out of pocket for them, for me, it doesn't really feel worth it, but crunch the numbers and see what makes sense. There are also lounge access memberships like Priority Pass, but to be totally honest with you, I don't feel like these are worth it most of the time, just because the more basic tiers don't even get you unlimited access. It's just you get a discounted rate on your entry, and for the most part, getting a travel-friendly credit card that includes lounge access is going to give you better value long term. All right, now let's move on to some airport packing tips. Now the first, especially if you want to make the most of online check-in, is traveling carry-on only. The amount of stress that this can save at the airport is unreal. No checked bags means not having to stress about baggage drop-off or baggage claim or losing your stuff. It really brings so much peace of mind. Of course, I understand that that's not possible for everyone, but if you're open to that idea, I do have a lot of videos and guides on how to pack light, so be sure to check those out. That said, sometimes checking a bag is inevitable. So if you are checking a bag, another important tip to keep in mind is to take photos of your bag before you drop them off. And this is really important in case you need to prove anything like damage. I've luckily not had this happen to me, but I have heard stories from a lot of travelers who have said that their bags have gotten damaged in transit and they haven't been able to claim for the damage just because they didn't have proof that it wasn't damaged before the flight. So if you have photos of what your suitcases looked like before the flight and after, that can really help in case any damage does occur. It can also be really helpful if for some reason your bags go missing, because then you can just show them a photo of the bags and it can help the people at the lost luggage office really help identify your stuff a lot quicker. Another helpful thing to do for checked bags especially is to put something distinctive on your checked luggage. These days, a lot of luggage sets can look the same. You know, everybody's got the same brands and the same colors. And so it can be really easy for people to accidentally take your bag thinking it's their own. And I'm saying this from personal experience because this did happen to me once. I had a gray Samsonite suitcase with a pink luggage tag. Guess someone else on my flight also had the same. So they took my suitcase wrongfully, and luckily they did bring it back really quickly, but it was quite a scary experience to think that someone accidentally took my bag and I didn't know if they were gonna bring it back. So be sure to put something distinctive on your suitcase, whether that's a full-on luggage cover or just like a luggage strap or even just a distinctive luggage tag. Now, speaking of luggage tags, one thing to keep in mind is you don't want to be writing any really personal information on your luggage tag, things like your address, for instance, or even your full name. I would personally just write my phone number or an email address because that's how someone's gonna get in touch with you anyway. The less information you can potentially give strangers, the better, because sometimes it's very easy for people to read your luggage tag when it's just kind of out in the open in the airport. For that reason, I would also recommend maybe getting a luggage tag that has a cover so that your information isn't easily visible just from looking at it. Now, another tip is I would really recommend getting some kind of luggage tracker as well to put inside your checked suitcase. This brings additional peace of mind and honestly isn't that expensive. So for iPhone users, one thing I can definitely recommend is an Apple AirTag. I bought a few of these recently and now it's just so nice knowing where my bags are at all times, and also having one can help you track down lost luggage as well if that does happen. Another alternative is Tile, which is compatible with all devices. I know I've been talking about lost bags a lot, but in my experience, it's always best to prepare for worst case scenarios. So another packing tip that I would highly recommend is making sure you have at least some emergency outfits and clothes inside your carry-on, because then if your checked bag does go missing, you at least have some emergency clothes and outfits to tide you over. Now, another must is to plan your airport outfit really carefully. A lot of people just throw on what's comfiest, but in my experience, it does pay off to put some thought into it. Some general pointers would be to wear slip-on shoes, so shoes that come off really easily without you having to undo laces or anything like that. And also make sure you're wearing socks, because some airports do require you to take your shoes off, and the last thing you want to do is be walking barefoot through security. I would also dress in layers because airports and airplanes, the temperature can fluctuate so much, so you don't want to be stuck wearing a really thick sweater that you can't take off because you have nothing underneath. So just keep in mind that you should be dressing in layers for warmth. That way you can just adjust to the different temperatures. I would also avoid wearing synthetic fibers like polyester or nylon, not only because they're not very breathable, so the likelihood of you being sweaty on an airplane skyrockets. This is quite a dark note, but a lot of people do say that you shouldn't be wearing these fabrics on airplanes as well, just because they are the most flammable. So in the absolute worst case scenario, if something does happen, you want to make sure you're not wearing fabrics that'll just burn instantly. And avoid wearing too many accessories as well. So things like jewelry, belts, just remember that you're going to have to take all that off at security security, so just save yourself the trouble. Now, this is a controversial opinion, but based on my own personal experience, I do think it helps to dress up a little bit nicer when you're at the airport. I know for a lot of people, they want to be as comfortable as possible for a long haul flight, but based on my experience, if you are at least a little bit dressed up, meaning you're not wearing pajamas or like, you know, a full-on sweatsuit, people do take you a lot more seriously, and they do tend to be nicer to you in different situations, like from passport control to if you're needing customer service, etc. I do feel like people are just nicer to you and again, take you more seriously. So if you want to ensure that you have a more stress-free experience, I would say dress up a little bit nicer. Now, this obviously doesn't mean you need to dress up in a suit or a ball gown, but I just mean dressing up a little bit nicer, not wearing your pajamas on the plane, which I know some people like to do, but just as a preference, I don't. So even just like leggings with a nice top or like a loose dress, it works. People are just nicer to you, trust me on this one. Another key tip is to pack your personal items smartly. So I know a lot of people, when it comes to packing their personal item, whether it's a backpack or a purse, what they'll do is they'll just throw all their important stuff in it and call it a day. But really, when you're preparing to pack for the airport, what you should be doing is packing everything in order of the likelihood you'll need it at the airport. So I always make sure what I have on top are things like electronics and liquids, things that I know I'll have to remove during the security process. That way, when you get to the airport, you don't have to rummage through for all your important things that you know you'll need. I would also pack my personal item assuming that there's going to be some kind of delay. That means making sure that inside my bag I have all sorts of entertainment that's available for offline use. So, you know, movies and things that are downloaded, because you can't necessarily rely on data or Wi-Fi, and also having a few emergency snacks as well. I know this seems like overkill, but trust me, better safe than sorry. You don't want to be stuck at the airport for like hours and hours, or even worse, stuck on the plane for hours and hours with nothing to do and nothing to eat. Now, speaking of packing, another thing I make sure I do is separate all my liquids in advance. So contrary to popular belief, you don't need to wait until you get to the airport to get those little baggies to put your liquids in. You can actually use any clear bag in most cases. Some airports can be a bit weird about this, but for the most part, you are okay to just separate your liquids in advance. So I always make sure I do this and have that bag of liquids at the very top of my personal bag. So that way, when the time comes, I can just fling it onto the tray and impress and dazzle everyone with my efficiency. That said, it is important for you to look up what the precise rules are in regards to liquids in your destination and at your airport, because I do know that some countries will impose stricter restrictions. For instance, they limit the size of the bag that you're allowed, or they'll limit the total amount of liquids that you're allowed to have. So I've seen a lot of really sad TikToks of girls having to throw away their expensive skincare because they didn't double check the restrictions in advance. So make sure you do look those up to avoid disappointment. I would also recommend bringing your own water bottles, so something that you can refill once you get over to the other side. And this is because most airports do have water fountains these days that allow you to refill your bottle for free, and you don't want to be paying like $5 for a bottle of water. I just feel like that's outrageous. Another more old school tip is freezing a bottle of water and then bringing it through security, which is apparently totally allowed because it's technically not a liquid. To be honest, I don't really see the point of doing that these days, because you can have a refillable water bottle that you fill up on the other side. And also it just seems like an unnecessary use of plastic. So yeah, definitely just bring your own water bottle. Another small tip that I alluded to before is to bring your own snacks. Now, airport food honestly is the worst of all worlds, possibly, because it's expensive, it's unhealthy for the most part, and it's just like not very good in general, especially when it comes to snacks, because when you get over to the other side, it's not like the airport has magical snacks that are just better than the ones that you can get on the other side of civilization. You know, all the chocolate bars and chips and things that you buy at the airport are the same as the ones you would get from the supermarket for a fraction of the cost. So be sure to bring your own snacks, and that way you can control kind of healthier snacks as well, because what you don't want to be doing is spending $5 on an airport banana. Now, in advance of your departure as well, another very important thing to do is making sure that all your devices are fully charged. So I know you might be thinking, well, the airport has outlets, I can just charge my things when I get there. Don't count on there being outlets that are free or ones that even work, okay? So just make sure that your phone, at the very least, is fully charged, as well as anything you might be using for entertainment or work, so like laptop, iPad, etc. Having full charge is a crucial part of the preparation process. An extra step here that I'd really recommend is also bringing a portable charger, because like I said, you can't necessarily rely on airports having free outlets for you to be using, and also on planes, you know, it sometimes is better to just have your own portable charger, especially because I've been in situations where the outlets on planes don't work either, so the last thing you want to do is be fully reliant on outlets. So for peace of mind, just bring your own portable charger. I recently bought this one and it's very slim, holds so much charge and is really handy to bring around. So yeah, definitely worth the investment. Alternatively, if you don't want to bring a portable charger, what you could bring is a power splitter or like a surge protector, so that way you can plug it in and then turn one outlet into multiple ones for charging multiple devices or potentially for making new friends. Now, all that said, if you do bring charging cables with the intention of using them on the airplane, do keep in mind that most airplanes are still using USB-A ports rather than the more standard USB-C ports that can be seen in more modern electronics. So if your plug looks like this, it probably won't fit on most regular airplane charging ports. So just keep that in mind, either bring an adapter or try to bring a charging cable that is USB-A rather than USB-C, because a lot of airplanes still use that older port. Another tech must-have for airports and for flying in general is a good set of noise-canceling headphones. I cannot understate how much a good pair of noise-canceling headphones will completely transform your flying process. Honestly, these can help drown out any forms of noise, whether it's generic airplane noise, crying babies, snoring from your neighbor, everything. It's amazing. So make sure you grab a good pair. I have these Sony ones that I love. Now, in addition to all those things that you should be packing, I should also stress that it's important that you have all the necessary information that you need for your flight before you go to the airport. And I know this sounds basic, but I know that there are so many people out there who prefer to just figure it out once they get to the airport, and that is a sure recipe for stress. So here are some of the basic things that you need to make sure you know before you leave for the airport. So firstly, the terminal, where the check-in desks are, what time your check-in opens and closes, as well as luggage allowances and restrictions, because this does vary from airline to airline, so don't take that for granted. Make sure you're always double checking. Now, once you get to the airport, some additional tips to keep in mind. Firstly, make sure you arrive with plenty of time to spare. I know this is such a basic tip, but a lot of people still like to cut it close. And so I would definitely not recommend that, because that is probably the #1 thing that you should do to ensure that you're stressed out at the airport, is arriving with very little time to spare. And honestly, I quite enjoy my bonus time at the airport. It's nice to have a chance to catch up on shows, read my book, catch up on work, whatever that might be. So yeah, just remember, you're never gonna regret showing up at the airport a little bit earlier than you're supposed to. So what I personally do for international flights is 3 hours in advance, and also 2 hours in advance for domestic flights. Next tip, if you're parking at the airport, make sure you do take a photo of your vehicle and also kind of the surroundings to make sure that you're able to locate your vehicle easily once you get back. Definitely better to have some reference rather than rely on your memory after tons of pina coladas on your vacation. Now, another thing is to always make sure you have your passport and your documents easily ready and grabbable at any point. I know a lot of people who keep their documents like in their carry-on suitcase or whatever. That to me doesn't make sense. You want to make sure that you're always able to just grab your passport and your documents, because you'll walk to security and someone will want to see your documents, and then at security they'll want to see them again. When you check into the lounge, they'll want to see it again. So the best answer is to just make sure you always have them readily available. So for me personally, when I'm dressing for the airport, what I'll usually do is I'll wear either a jacket or a vest that has hidden pockets on the inside. That way I can just keep my passport and my boarding pass in there. It's easily reachable. Alternatively, you can use a belt bag or a fanny pack if you're more old school. In any case, just make sure that you are always able to just produce your passport at a moment's notice, and that way it's also easier for you to make sure that you still have them. If you're paranoid like me and are always scared of losing your important documents, it's good to be able to just do like a quick pat down and then know that you still have them. Just be aware though that some stricter airlines might consider a belt bag or a fanny pack as your personal item. So if you're bringing one, make sure you're able to condense it and put it inside your carry-on suitcase or your personal item when you're boarding. Now, if you are using a digital boarding pass, which is actually very common these days, one thing I would recommend is making sure that the brightness on your screen is turned up all the way, because most of the time when those scanners don't read your boarding pass correctly, it's because the screen is too dark. So make sure it's at 100% brightness. And also, if you can, make sure you lock the orientation of your phone, meaning, you know, if it's like this, it's going to stay in portrait orientation even when you move your phone around, because a lot of the time where issues pop up is if it starts rotating every time you like move it over the scanners, and people get very frustrated, and it's really silly to watch because it's such a simple fix. So just go on your phone, swipe down and lock the orientation before you go, and then you shouldn't have any trouble. A bonus tip for Apple users is to always make sure you're adding your boarding passes into your Apple Wallet. And the reason for that is just because when it's in your Apple Wallet, then when the time comes for your flight, it'll actually appear on your lock screen, and that way you're only ever one tap away from being able to show your boarding pass. Now, when you arrive at the airport and you need to check in or maybe drop off your luggage, one thing I would recommend is actually taking a look at the different check-in lines. If there is a check-in line specifically for business or people who are part of that airline's loyalty club, a lot of the time, here's the secret, if they're not busy, they would be happy to help you. So if you notice that there's nobody lining up, there's no actual business class people lining up for them, be sure to just ask like, oh, would you be able to check me in? A lot of the time this can work, and then that way you get to skip the really long line. That said, if you've arrived late and you are genuinely worried about missing your flight, one thing I would advise is going straight to someone that works for your airline and letting them know. Because at the end of the day, they don't want you to miss your flight either. So oftentimes what they'll do is they'll try to expedite your check-in process. So they'll bring you to another check-in desk or help you skip the line. Of course, this only works in cases when you're genuinely in a rush, but it never hurts to ask. Now let's move on to tips for airport security. Now, when you get to security, one really underrated hack that I have is to simply be strategic when you're picking your line, because not all lines are created equal. Oftentimes what I try to do is I try to make sure I'm picking based on who seems like they're most experienced and most efficient. So if you see a business traveler, they don't have a lot of stuff, you can tell that they are used to traveling, I would definitely try to line up behind them versus a very frazzled family of 10 who all have like all their documents everywhere and they're all yelling at each other. You don't want to be stuck behind that. So always be strategic with who you are going to line up behind, just because that can make a huge difference in terms of wait times. If you are stuck in a long lineup, another thing I would do is start preparing for the security check while you're waiting in line. So what I mean by that is taking off your jacket, making sure there's nothing in your pockets, even opening up your backpack and getting ready to take out your liquids and things like that. All that can really help expedite the process once you get to security, and people will be floored by how efficient you are. Now, when you're putting your belongings in the trays, just be sure to listen out to what the employees are saying, because a lot of the time different airports have different rules on how they want you to approach things. So whether shoes have to go in their own bin, or if your liquids and anything you separate have to go in their own bin, which most of the time they do. So be sure to listen to what they're saying, because they tend to get a little bit angry if you don't listen. And as for any loose, smaller items like keys, sunglasses, AirPods, I would definitely make sure you actually have those inside of bags or inside pockets and not just loosely on the tray. Just because I have heard of instances where people's belongings have been stolen, and to be honest, it's very easy to just steal things from the security bins if it's like a small item. So make sure that you are putting all those small items inside of other bags, because also it can be hard to keep an eye on your security tray, especially if there's a long lineup. Now, another thing I would advise you do if you have a very generic thing like a laptop that looks like all other laptops, like this one for instance, it looks like every other MacBook that exists out there in the universe, what I would recommend is getting a unique sticker or something to put on your laptop just to make sure that people don't mistake it for theirs. And a lot of the time this can happen even accidentally, just because they all look the same, and sometimes the trays can kind of get mixed up in order. So be sure to keep that in mind. Try to make sure you have a unique identifier on your laptop. And I said this before, but it's worth repeating. Just make sure you're listening to what the security staff are actually saying, just because these days, a lot of airports have kind of switched up their security protocol. So some places might want your boots off, some places might want you to keep them on. Some places want you to separate your liquids and your electronics, but some of them have fancy scanners now that require you to not do that. So it can be a little bit confusing if you've gotten into the habit of engaging with security in a certain way, so just make sure you are listening to all their instructions. Now, here are some final tips for when you are about to board. First, if you have headphones on, make sure they are not at full volume and that maybe you have like one earbud out, or maybe like one of the big ear things not completely covering your ear. Just the point is you want to make sure that you can hear the different announcements that are being said, because oftentimes they will ask for people to come verify their documents, or there will be other important boarding announcements that you should pay attention to. So make sure you are not wearing noise canceling headphones that completely block out all noise. Now, if you have a lot of time before your flight and you want somewhere to relax apart from the gate, one really helpful resource is a website called sleepingatairports.com or sleepinginairports.com. I can't remember. I'll put the correct one here. But in any case, this is a really great resource that tells you all the quiet places to take a nap or different places that you can lounge at various airports around the world. So be sure to check that out, and that way, if you have a lot of time, you can just scope out another place to rest. If you do plan to do that though, make sure you're setting an alarm that is well in advance of your boarding time, just to make sure you don't accidentally fall asleep and miss your flight. Now, when boarding begins, do make sure that you pay attention to your boarding group number. They don't tend to be very kind to people who just try to barge in and board when it's not their turn. That said, if you do have a carry-on suitcase and you want to make sure that you are able to store it above your seat, then make sure that you are one of the first people to go and line up when they do call your boarding number, just because a lot of the time these days, flights are quite fully booked. So there might not necessarily be space for everyone to put their carry-on suitcases up top. In those instances though, they will let you check your bag for free, so it's not too much of a hassle, but if you don't want to be parted from your bag, keep that in mind that you should be one of the first to board. Of course, if you don't mind being separated from your bag and you'd actually rather check it, you just don't want to pay the extra fee, most of the time they will welcome volunteers who are willing to check in their bag. So it doesn't hurt to inquire with the employee at the desk just to see if maybe you'd be able to check your bag. Finally, if you are faced with some kind of issue where you are in need of customer service and there's a super long lineup of people trying to rebook their flights or get vouchers or whatever that might be, then one really great hack is to join the lineup, but then hop on the customer service hotline of your airline. And in those cases, a lot of the time that can actually work out to be quicker than lining up in person, because everyone on your flight is trying to get customer service at the same time, whereas the people on the phones can be free. So this depends on the airline, it depends on the circumstance, but it doesn't hurt to try and just like call up customer service, or even hop on Twitter, or I should say X, I guess, but hop on there to try to get some customer service while you're waiting in line. And oh, last one I will say for reals this time is that really it pays off so much to be polite and to be nice. Most of the time, airline employees, airport employees, they're dealing with super angry, super rude, and super mean people. So if you are the nice one that is smiling, they will want to help you, okay? So just definitely keep that in mind, that the person that is providing the customer service is very rarely the person whose fault it is that you are in the situation you're in. So the nicer and more patient you can be, the more that's likely to pay off. All right, thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed that video, and be sure to like and subscribe for more practical travel videos just like this one. I'll see you guys next week. Bye!